Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and grateful for this opportunity to talk about something that I care about a lot and maybe raise a little bit of awareness about light pollution as an environmental issue. So my lab is exclusively focused on light pollution as an environmental issue. And we are based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in this building right here. So you can see it's a pretty convenient location. There's lots of light pollution around to look at and think about. Yeah, so my background is in firefly conservation. And in 2017, this news article came out in Science, which really got my interest because it's nice to see fireflies represented. But it had not occurred to me until then that what I was hearing sort of day to day, we don't see as many fireflies as we used to. Where did they go? These kinds of questions aren't firefly specific. There seems to be something going on a very broad scale that's affecting insect biodiversity and abundance. And so this was sort of the first news of what we have come to call the insect apocalypse. And it was based on a study out of Germany that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then the New York Times piece came out about a year later, which really got a lot of attention. And it was based on a little bit broader range of evidence showing sort of again and again these kind of unexpected declines and pretty steep declines in insect abundance and diversity. And got everybody pretty freaked out because insects are really important to the health of our ecosystems, and we're not going to last very long if they're gone. And so there was a paper the next year that sort of put all of the evidence together and really got people talking, and entomologists talking, sort of reckoning with this growing trend. And so this paper came out talking about how widespread declines are. They estimated that 40% of insects are declining, which is just an enormous number. And it inspired a lot of discussion, and a lot of, I think, digital ink was spilled on this topic, with some argument about, is it really 40%? Are we overestimating? Are we underestimating? But the big picture being a lot of entomologists are really, really worried for the future of insects and the future of humanity as a result. And some of the things that sort of caught people's attention are data like these from Dan Jansen, sort of anecdotal reports of just these incredible declines in the number of moths and other insects that he sees attracted to these lights in the cloud forests of Costa Rica. And in fact, a lot of the sort of sentiment among entomologists, this sense of doom, this sense that insects are declining, is connected in some way to light, because artificial lights are one of the main ways that we experience insects, entomologists and everyday people. So entomologists will set up sheets that attract moths and look at the sheets, count the moths to get a sense of what's out there. And they've been doing this for decades. And everyday people, some of their experiences with insects are at the gas station with these really bright lights on, which will attract all sorts of things. And some of the discussion, sort of anecdotal reports around the insect apocalypse were things like this, like, the gas station lights are empty now. I used to see moths on my windows in the morning, but now they're not there. I used to see insects caught in the beams of my car headlights, but now they're not there. And so all of this experience that we have of insects is related to light. And yet, when you get entomologists in a room and ask them, okay, what is happening? What is the threat to insects? You come up with a lot of answers, but very rarely do people think about the artificial lights themselves. So Dave Wagner wrote a really amazing review of threats to insects, and he does talk about light pollution, to his credit. But you can see in the splash image that they made to go out with this paper, light pollution isn't even suggested. You could say, oh, this sort of urbanization, maybe, there will be lights on these houses, but it's not sort of put forth as a driving factor. And in fact, all of the insects shown on this image are active during the day, and not nocturnal, despite the fact that most insects are nocturnal. And I'm going to come back to this. There's sort of this giant blind spot when it comes to what's going on at night and how that affects insects. And that's what I want to explore today. So this has sort of haunted me for several years now, this question of why aren't we talking about this? Why, when we bring up insect declines, do we have all of these things, but light pollution just often doesn't make the list? And why is that? And I think there's a lot of arguments to be made. And so I want to kind of go through them. So some might argue that light pollution isn't really a widespread issue. It's sort of confined to cities, and cities, don't make up that much of the globe, right? So on a grand scale, it might not be a big deal. And I just don't think that's true. So to define light pollution more precisely, it's any sort of, we like to say unnecessary light, although, it's any sort of artificial light at night that is going out into the environment. And so we can have what are called point sources of light, like street lights that, illuminate the surrounding area. And when that light reflects off of the ground or is directed up into the sky, it gets kind of scattered around and turns into a diffuse haze that's known as sky glow. So anybody who has tried to go stargazing in a place like Boston, Massachusetts, knows what sky glow is. It's this sort of gross, grayish, reddish haze that prevents you from seeing the stars. And we can measure sky glow from space using satellite imagery, and then use that imagery to build models of what the amount of artificial light in the environment at night across the globe. And here is one of those maps. So in this map, every area of the US that isn't dark gray or black is unnaturally bright at night. So you see, yes, the worst light pollution happens in places like Boston, Massachusetts, but it extends very far from Boston, Massachusetts, and actually covers a good half of the US. And these figures also are not the full story, because when you measure light with a satellite, you're missing a lot of other light on the ground. So this is an example I like to give. This is a house in Lincoln, Massachusetts, right next to a firefly habitat. I'll play it again. Where, there's trees around, and the light from those windows is unlikely to make it up into the sky, get picked up by a satellite and included in this big scary map. And yet it's still radically changing the environment of these fireflies and other insects that are around. And so it is a very widespread issue. Okay, well, some might say there is this sense that the scariest thing about the insect apocalypse is that we're seeing insect declines in otherwise pristine areas. So that first paper I mentioned, that was featured in this article about German nature reserves. These were people in these nature reserves in Germany, totally undisturbed land, and they were still seeing it was a 75% decline in insect abundance over about 30 years. So huge declines. And so people might argue, well, there's no light pollution in these reserves, right? And here is one of the reserves. So it's a bit of conserved land. Here's one of the traps they used to catch insects. And there is some stuff nearby, but in general, this is what we would call a protected area. Well, it turns out that if you look at a map of sky glow, that a lot of these sampling areas were not very protected from light pollution, because this is something that's very difficult, well, not difficult to regulate, but a lot of people aren't really regulating it. And so some nature reserves will have lights inside them associated with facilities or things like that. But even if they don't, it's very easy to have structures on the outside that sort of send light in to an otherwise dark area. And what is important to realize about this is that when people go to this site during the day and they count the insects and they're trying to figure out what's going on, they go to the site during the day. And so a lot of times people aren't measuring light pollution because they're not seeing it, but it is really present in these otherwise pristine areas. And actually, most light pollution does not occur in cities, but occurs outside of cities. And that's sort of a rule of geography, right? There's more rural areas than there are urban areas, and a lot of rural areas are very, very bright. And they can be bright because of human development or also other random human activities. So oil and gas drilling operations or the US-Mexico border wall. These are things that radically change what is an otherwise fairly natural landscape. And even when there are people working very hard to keep an area pristine, it can have light pollution. So this is a map, an artificially colored map of the sky at the Chacao Culture National Historical Park, which is an international dark sky park where the Park Service has put in a lot of work trying to preserve the natural sky so that visitors can experience it as the ancestral Pueblo peoples once did. And so this is the Milky Way, that's natural light in the night sky. But if you subtract out all of the light that you would expect to see from the stars and things like that, you can still clearly see the glow of nearby cities on the horizon, which is very striking to me because, for millennia, looking at the night sky has been something that makes us feel small and insignificant. And now looking at the night sky might remind you of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is not necessarily maybe the effect that we want to have. But certainly there's nothing the Park Service can do about this, right? I mean, we have to sort of get together to solve these kinds of problems. But the point is that this pristine reserve is not pristine as regards to light pollution. Okay. Well, sure, but a lot of these insect declines, they're a very recent phenomenon. So I said in Germany, they saw a 75% decline over 30 years. And a lot of these data tend to be in the 30 to 50-year range. And so you might argue that light pollution isn't really accelerating in a way that we would expect it to be driving these declines. Because you might think, well, a lot of these lights have been there for quite a while, and maybe the insects have adapted. But that's not really true either. So here is a painting of Boston Common at twilight, which was painted in the late 1800s. And you can see some of the older lighting technology. So around the borders of the park, we have these gas lamps. There's not that many, and they're not all that bright, and they were very expensive, so they wouldn't be on all night. A little bit later was the advent of electric lighting, and that's when things started speeding up a bit. So you can see now there's more lights. This is the Strand in London. And then around the 60s, we started getting high intensity discharge lights. So these are newer and brighter lighting technologies, metal halide, mercury vapor, fluorescent, and we started putting these out and making the streets brighter and wider and more open for sort of economic activity in the evenings. And now these days, following the development of LED technology, Boston Common at twilight looks like this. So as lights have become cheaper and easier to maintain and more energy efficient, we've just started putting them everywhere, really, truly everywhere. And so light pollution is growing rapidly and has been for a few decades now. So here, this paper was published in 2001, and they tried to reconstruct the growth in light pollution over time using satellite imagery. And this is where it was when they stopped measuring it. And this over here was their prediction of how bad things could get if we didn't, turn the ship around. And I think things are already way worse than this, actually. So it is, things are getting worse instead of better, really, really quickly. And even more recently, we've discovered that actually there are some biases with satellite imagery, which means that it's even worse again than we thought, because satellites are unable to measure a lot of the light coming from LEDs. LEDs have a lot of blue light in them. Satellites can't see blue. And so if we only trust the satellite imagery, we end up getting a pretty biased picture of what's happening. And so a recent study used community scientists, regular people out at night counting stars to get an idea from ground level what's going on with the night sky, and they found that it was way worse than we thought. So previous estimates were that the sky had gotten about 50% brighter in the past 25 years. And these researchers found that the sky had become 100% brighter, twice as bright, in just the past 10 years. And they calculated that if as a kid you lived in a place where you could see about 250 stars at night, as an adult at that same place, you would see about 100 stars. So it's a really drastic loss in night sky visibility. And that means a drastic change to the visual environment for us and for the other animals that live there. So, woo, like it's spooky, right? It's scary and it's a lot, but you know, maybe it's not that bad, right? Maybe light pollution just isn't that harmful. Maybe it's just not a big deal. And so I'm going to delve into some of the evidence that says otherwise, that does say that light pollution is a big threat to insects. But before I talk about the studies, I want to sort of argue from first principles that this sort of viewpoint doesn't really make sense. So think about, you know, an animal in the natural environment for all of evolutionary time. So we're talking millions and millions of years. The Earth has been light during the day and dark at night. And there have been a few sources of light at night, the stars and the moon, and the setting sun, fireflies as well. But apart from these few things, it's been entirely dark. And so only within the past, let's say, 200 years, have we really started seeing changes at night. And on an evolutionary timescale, that is not enough time for insects or other animals to adapt. And we shouldn't expect them to know what to do when we add light into the nocturnal environment, because it's never been there before. We haven't really given them a chance. And so in that way, I think it's important to realize just how big this change is. And if it seems like a small change to you, I would argue that it's probably because you don't see it at night because you're asleep, but the insects aren't, many of them. So talking about sort of the effects of light pollution on insects, there are two papers that I've written recently that kind of delve into this, and both of them are available for free online. So the first one is open access. If you want to read it, you can just Google the name. And the second one, you can Google the name and click the second result. It's up on the Park Service website. If you're interested in more information, you can give these a look, but I'll just run through the basic concepts. So I think it's helpful when talking about how light pollution affects insects to divide it into different categories, because it's a very complicated thing. And so I've come up with these 5 categories of impact, 5 things that light pollution does. And we'll sort of go through them one by one. And I've also assigned each one an emoji, which is going to show up in the top right corner, just to keep us all on track. So the first is that artificial light interferes with an insect's sense of time. So the clearest example is from nocturnal insects. So you can imagine this moth here. So it's interesting. I think we underappreciate how much insects know. And so one of the things that's amazing about insects is that they're very good at telling time, because they have to do things at certain times. And this moth comes out to forage for nectar at night at that certain time. And so the way it tells time is it looks outside at how bright it is. And when it gets dark enough, it comes out, it drinks from this flower, it might pollinate, you know, it interacts with its environment. But if it's artificially bright outside, the moth is going to think that it's daytime, and so it will probably wait a little bit longer for it to get dark. But if the artificial light is from a street light that's left on all night, you know, this moth could wait forever and totally miss out on that part. You know, that is its life that it would be missing out on. And we know that artificial light can suppress the activity of nocturnal insects because we use this fact in pest control. So some greenhouses will install lights specifically so that nocturnal caterpillars don't eat as much of their crops because they think it's daytime and they go to bed. So it's a really powerful form of pest control. And by putting lights everywhere outside of greenhouses, we're sort of pest controlling the globe in a way that I would argue is not very good. And so there's these daily impacts on the daily clock of these insects. And these also cascade over the season on a sort of yearly scale. So I like to sort of liken this to humans. So we, a lot of you probably know, if you stay up late scrolling on your phone, you'll have trouble falling asleep because your brain is tricked into thinking it's daytime. And you also probably know that if you live in Boston or someplace where it gets really dark in the winter, you can use a happy light or a full spectrum light. Look at this light in the morning and it'll trick your brain into thinking that it's summer and you'll have a little bit more energy and things like that. And so here, the light is, again, making it seem like daytime. And over the course of the year, artificial lights make it seem like summer, even when it's not. And so there's two examples I want to briefly mention. So many. Insects are amazing, but I'll just pull out a few highlights. A lot of insects have these summer and winter forms that they use. So in the summer, they're really active at reproducing. For example, on the left here, this is an aphid that is capable of just sort of cloning itself and making, it's called parthenogenesis, making many, many, many daughter aphids all in a row over and over again to expand its population during the summer. And in fall, as it gets close to winter, it stops doing that and it enters a more stable stage to cope with the cold. And on the right is a leaf mining moth caterpillar. So right here, these caterpillars live inside leaves and spend their whole lives eating the inside of the leaf. And they also have a summer mode where they're going through a lot of generations and building up their population and eating tons of leaves. But as it gets closer to winter, they enter into a more stable, cold hardy state to survive the coming winter. But in both of these cases, if you add artificial light, the insect is fooled into thinking it's summer and continues in its summer mode, even as the weather gets colder and colder and colder, because they've evolved to use light cues instead of temperature cues, even when the light cues are totally divorced from reality. And you can imagine this is very detrimental, right? If you're in your summer mode in your bikini and all of a sudden, it's 0 degrees outside, your population, you and your population are really going to suffer. And we talk about, entomologists at least, we talk a lot about mismatches when it comes to insect conservation because insects, they interact with certain things, right? They pollinate flowers or they eat leaves or things like that. And in the context of climate change, we're concerned about these mismatches. So you might have an insect that comes out at the same time as its host plant. And if the plants move earlier, they flower earlier or they bloom earlier, and the insects don't. Well, if the insects do as well, if they go along with it, it's good. But if the insects are using different cues and they don't shift their activity earlier, then you get these mismatches where this fly now has no orange plants to eat. The plant that it was supposed to eat came out too early. And it's also the case that you can get these sort of swaps. So if the insects don't change what they're doing and they still stay out at the same time, but the plants move earlier, then this insect could maybe feed on this new plant, whereas this insect doesn't have any plant available for it. And all of these models and thinking are just to say, these mismatches can be very damaging. And we often think about this in the context of climate change, which makes things bloom earlier or what have you. But we almost never talk about this in the context of light pollution, which does the exact same thing. And I would argue much worse in some cases, because for all of evolutionary history, light has been an extremely stable cue that insects can use to tell what time of year it is. And so they trust it a little bit more than temperature, which is not great in the current environment. And actually, so as regards, plants responding to artificial light and these sort of downstream effects on insects, This was first noticed way back in 1936, almost 100 years ago. This fellow in New York City noticed that these trees, these urban trees, would keep the leaves on the side that is closest to the streetlight. So these leaves are sort of being lit up continuously from the streetlight over here on the right, and they take longer to die and to fall off the tree. So a pretty big change. You can also see this most strongly in soybean fields. So this is a drone image of a soybean field. This is the streetlight right here. And you can see it casts a cone of illumination, and the plants respond to that. And in fact, you can even see the shadow here cast by the streetlight itself, where the plants are acting normally because they're in shadow. So light pollution has huge impacts on plant development, which has knock-on impacts on the insects that depend on them. And I'll just conclude this section by saying it's important to note that all of these impacts affect all kinds of insects. So insects that are active during the day and insects that are active at night. And that makes sense, right? Because light pollution also affects humans, and humans are not nocturnal or active during the day, but it still makes it harder for us to sleep, and it can put us into summer mode when we use the happy light, right? And so this impact is not exclusive to nocturnal insects. It affects day active ones as well. And I want to point out here, this is my little soapbox, that when we talk about insect declines, and when we talk about insects generally, so this is an image from a really great paper by Matt Forrester called Declines in Insect Abundance and Diversity, We Know Enough to Act Now. And it's a really powerful piece. But this splash image that they've chosen to show insect diversity, what's very interesting to me is that there's 2 nocturnal insects here and a whole bunch of day active insects. There's this huge bias towards the insects that come out during the day, the ones that we see, the ones that we interact with. But actually, 60% of insects are nocturnal. Most insects come out at night. And so even if light pollution was only an issue for them, that would be a huge problem. However, it's an issue for all insects across the clock. And yeah, so the Luna moth and the firefly are our sort of lone representatives of a fully nocturnal insect, which I just find is just these interesting biases. Anyway, okay, so next up, artificial light can also interfere with an insect's orientation in space, its ability to know where it is. So if you imagine, and these are nocturnal insects that I'm going to talk about now exclusively, it's, nocturnal insects, there's a lot of them out there, and I think we sort of don't really fully appreciate that they have goals and motivations and things that they need to go do. And in a lot of cases, insects need to be able to get around their environment and to find their way, either just sort of moving quickly through space or going out to forage and going back to their nest or things like that. And humans also need to find our way at night sometimes. And for a long time, for a lot of human history, we have used the night sky as a landmark to do this. So the North Star is a very classic example. If you want to go straight north, just walk towards the North Star. It's never going to change position, and eventually you will get where you're going. And there's other things you can use as well. So within an evening, if within an evening, all the rest of the stars aren't likely to change all that much either, right? So you can pick your favorite constellation and walk towards it or keep it on your right, and it's a good landmark to guide you. Insects do the same thing. So dung beetles are amazing at this. Dung beetles have goals, and their particular goal is to find a pile of dung, make a nice ball out of it, and then roll that ball away from the rest of the dung as quickly as possible so that nobody else gets it, so that they can lay their eggs in it and provision their young and things like this. And so in order to go in a straight line, what the dung beetles do is they will crawl on top of the dung and then look up and walk in a circle and try to figure out, sort of orient themselves to the sky, and then take off following the line of the Milky Way. So they follow the Milky Way as a landmark, and they use that to go straight. When it's light polluted, you can't see the Milky Way, and this recent study found that the dung beetles get very confused and sort of wander in random directions, which is not great if you're trying to go somewhere quickly. insects are amazing. So they can use the Milky Way, they can use stars, they can use the moon, they can use patterns of polarized starlight. And some insects will also use the shape of the canopy and the night sky, sort of the shape of the night skies with the canopy silhouetted. So some Japanese shield bugs do this in order to find their way home after they've gone out to get food for their young. These bugs covered in this paper actually like take care of their babies, which is just, again, totally incredible. And so they use this canopy pattern as a guide. And this pattern works because it's usually the case that the night sky is the brightest thing around and everything else is in shadow. But these days, that's often flipped. So if there are lights in the forest, it's going to make the trees brighter than the sky. And especially clouds, the role of clouds in the nighttime environment has completely changed. So it used to be the case that cloudy nights were darker, but these days, cloudy nights are brighter because the clouds reflect artificial light back down at us. So the whole situation is completely switched visually. And this is very confusing for insects that have relied on these cues for, hundreds of thousands of years. So there's also a very special form of spatial disorientation, or this sort of navigational confusion, which we call phototaxis. This is movement towards or away from light, or you could also call it flight to light behavior. And this is a very weird thing that many insects do. Moths are the most famous for doing this, but it's not exclusively a moth thing. So first, the subject of much poetry and literature, it was first recorded by Romans. Roman beekeepers would actually use fire to control the wax moths that were attacking their beehives. So we've known about this for a very long time. We still don't actually know why they do it, which is kind of interesting. But whatever the reason, it's a really bad idea. It's a really bad thing for them to do. It is not, they don't get any benefits from this. It's purely detrimental. And it's actually so weirdly unhelpful, such a weird thing for them to do, that way back when Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, this entomologist, Roland Trimen, sort of questioned, it was one of the things that people would bring up to refute his theory of evolution, because if evolution works, how on earth are moths doing this when it's so bad for them? So Roland Trimen wrote Darwin a letter way back when asking him about this. And Darwin basically said, quite rightly, that, artificial light is a very new object. And so probably the moths don't know what to do about it. But maybe at some point they'll stop doing it because, you know what, many millions of insects are going to be destroyed each year by this behavior. This is Roland Trimen's words. And it is definitely true. So insects that fly to lights go through a lot, none of it good. So like if they fly to a candle, they'll die instantly, right? Or if they fly to a hot light fixture, it can burn them, or they can get sort of physical damage from collision. In many cases, they're eaten by predators that have learned to go to lights in order to eat insects. So bats are a very famous case of this, but all sorts of predators do this. So bats, rats, shorebirds, geckos, cane toads, spiders, and then some day active predators actually stay up late at lights in order to eat insects. So jumping spiders and anoles and some birds as well will go to these lights to eat insects. So it's just huge predation pressure. And even if the insect manages to escape being eaten, it's still wasted a lot of time. So this is an image, this is not snow. These are mayflies that are attracted to the lights over a bridge. And they all go to these lights and they swarm. And then because they're there, they end up laying eggs on the road where the eggs are supposed to be in the water. So you can see this simple sort of behavioral confusion can really decimate a population in a big way. And even, if they avoid death, still they were wasting out on opportunities to forage or mate or do normal insect things. And then the flip side of this is that there are a whole bunch of other insects that move away from lights. They're what we call negatively phototactic, and like this cave cricket here. So these crickets emerge from caves at night to forage, but if there are lights on outside, just like the moth, it thinks, well, this isn't quite the place for me, and it goes back inside the cave and never manages to go and complete its normal life cycle. All right. And the next one is all about insect vision and nocturnal insect vision. I want to give another comparison to humans. So I imagine many of you driving around at night have had the pleasure of encountering LED headlights, which are super bright and blinding. They sort of stun you visually and prevent you from seeing much of the road in a way that's really dangerous. Now we have pretty good vision, but it's not all that sensitive. We're actually not very good at seeing in the dark. So you can imagine for a nocturnal insect that spends its whole life out seeing in the dark, trying to pick up whatever little bits of light that it can, something like this can really damage their eyes and blind them temporarily, possibly permanently. We don't know a lot about this, but I think it's a huge issue and it deserves a little bit more research. One finding that I want to highlight, though, is that there's this phenomenon in photography, which is that many crickets and katydids and grasshoppers, if you take a flash photo image with a bright camera flash, they'll actually hold their front leg up over their eye. It's called a camera salute. And I think we don't know why this happens. I think it's pretty easy to imagine that light is very painful. And so they're trying to shield their eyes as much as possible. So, yeah. And then the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit subtle, so I'll sort of guide you into it. It's what I call spectral confusion, and it has to do with the way things look at night. So here is a foxglove flower, as this is the way it looks to us humans. And these are pollinated by hawk moths. And so here is how it looks to a hawk moth at night in hawk moth vision, and this is under natural starlight. Here's what it looks like under a white LED at night. And here's what it looks like under an amber LED at night. Now, we are pretty smart, and so we can tell that these are the same flower, but insects aren't quite as good at that particular task. And so for them, artificial light of unusual color can make it difficult for them to see resources in their environment. And fireflies are sort of a classic test case, or sort of an extreme case of this situation, because they have this very special way of communicating. So each flash that you see, if you ever have had the pleasure of seeing a firefly display, all of these flashes of light are produced by male fireflies. They have this organ called their lantern, which bioluminesces and lights up. And they produce these flashes as courtship signals to attract females on the ground. So this guy flying around is doing a little ad saying, "This is me, here I am, I'm ready to mate." And he's hoping that somebody on the ground, like this female here, will like what she sees and flash back. Females are usually sitting pretty stationary on grass blades. They're not all walking as jauntily as this, but I think it's a great photo. So what, this normally happens at night when it's dark. What happens if it's not dark? Let me show you a video of a study that we did in the lab. So here in the lab, in this upper container, there's a male flashing. He does 3 times, and the female is below. She's flashing right inside the circle there, flash. And he flashes again, and she flashes back. And this is the courtship dialogue. Under light, the male keeps flashing. Now he's sort of walking along the center of the arena. The female completely doesn't respond. So he keeps trying, flash, 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 but the female does not respond at all. And so both partners have important roles in this courtship dialogue. And I did a lot of these studies with a bunch of different colors of light. And I found that in darkness, these fireflies would flash about 10 times a minute, and the females would respond almost every time. They really liked what they were seeing. But when you added light overhead, either dim or bright, cool white, warm white, blue, amber, or red light, the males flashed about half as much, so they got a little discouraged. And one of the reasons I think they got discouraged is because the females almost entirely stopped responding to the flashes that they saw. And if the females aren't into it, the courtship will not be successful, they will not reproduce, and they won't make more fireflies. And we might end up with a situation where, people ask me, all the time, where have all the fireflies gone? I used to see a lot when I was a kid, and I don't anymore. And I'll talk more about color in a second, but I think it's important to note that amber light was really, really bad for females. So it's orange colored light. And I think that makes sense because firefly flashes are pretty orangey, kind of yellow-orange. So there's a lot of overlap there. But this concludes a whirlwind tour of the things that artificial light does to insects. And these are sort of overlapping categories, but you get the general idea. And this paper, summarizing it, has a figure that kind of goes along with it, where you sort of getting at these ideas. And I'll just move on though. So I think we, hopefully you agree, somewhat debunked all of these possible reasons that light pollution isn't really on people's radar. And so I would like to propose my own explanation, which is that it is a big deal, but we just don't see it. And so we're not talking about it because we're not seeing it. And let me give you an example. This is a beautiful nature reserve by my house. This is the Alewife Brook Reservation. I love this place. So my husband and I go for walks around here all the time during lunch. It's so beautiful. And it's been a reservation for a long time. Somewhat recently, this development company bought up the land along sort of the edges here and built these buildings. And it was a very green architecture project. So these buildings are very new and they're very, eco-friendly. So they're all LEED certified, super green. They're all glass, they're like passively solar heated. And people come and work in biotech in these areas. And I like to imagine that these people, go to work every day and they're just really like soaking in the nature and like really appreciating how nice it is to be in such an eco-friendly part of Boston. And then, they pat themselves on the back and then they go home and they leave the lights on all night. And so these lights shine out through these big glass windows into the reservation, completely changing the whole nocturnal environment, which is, half of the day, 60% of the insects, over 50% of the animals are active at night, and they're seeing this, but the people are not seeing it, right? They're home asleep, it doesn't bother them. And so I think we need to start seeing this. It's a big problem because if we don't see it, we can't change it. And on that note, please enjoy an extremely well-lit stock image of stargazing at night, which is like everybody is so brightly illuminated. And I want to borrow a slide from Dan Jansen, who gave this talk on insect declines in 2018. And he says that the real causes of insect decline are public apathy, public fear, public ignorance, and science ignorance. And what I think is really interesting is that a lot of these things are also true about dark sky conservation. So why is it so bright outside at night? Because people don't care, because people are afraid of the dark, because people don't even know it's really a problem. They didn't remember to close their curtains, but they can't see it. And because scientists don't really realize that it's a problem. I mean, if the summary of drivers of declines is any example, we're just not really thinking about it because a lot of us aren't out there at night. And now there are many things that you can do to make environments more dark sky friendly and limit the amount of light pollution. The general idea, simple rules, is to shield lights and make sure they direct light where it's needed, try to use longer wavelengths, talk more about that in a bit, keep lights as dim as possible, and put them on timers so that they're only on when people are around. Unfortunately, recently, we seem to be going backwards. Our lights are getting a lot brighter and they're getting a lot bluer because we're transitioning from these older lighting types to blue-rich, super bright LEDs. What's frustrating to me is that this is often pitched as a very environmentally friendly thing to do. So here's a favorite light from the Tufts campus, totally unshielded, way too bright, melts your eyeballs whenever you see it, and there's a plaque under it celebrating this light as an example of sustainability in action because it's very energy efficient. I do think energy efficiency is important, and I am in favor of LEDs, but especially some of the first LEDs, they're way brighter than they need to be. We have the technology to keep these things dim and to make sure that they're not on when no one is around. So in that spirit, I collaborated with Xerces to make a guideline for firefly-friendly lighting. So hopefully somebody can put the link in the chat. I'll do it in a sec, if not. But it's on the website, totally freely available. And it's just some very simple rules that you can follow to make your lights firefly-friendly and really generally environmentally friendly, which is, there's some details, but essentially it comes out to don't have a light when you're not using it. There shouldn't be lights on when there aren't people around. And if we could just take care of that, I think we'd be a pretty long way towards totally solving this issue. I also like to point people towards the International Dark Sky Association, which has been working since 1988 to limit light pollution. And in the beginning, it was pretty astronomically focused, but there are a lot of folks now really interested in the impact of light on wildlife. And they have a lot of resources for example, talking to your neighbors or working with your local, town and state legislatures to get bills passed. And it's a really energizing group. We just got the Massachusetts chapter. One of our members just got a lighting ordinance passed in Nantucket, which is really exciting, meant solely to limit light pollution. And yeah, I think it's a very motivating thing and a very helpful institution as well, as is Xerces, of course. And so to end, I think now more than ever, we need people to be talking about and thinking about these issues. It's getting totally out of control out there, but we also could totally solve this. It's so easy. We just have to turn out the lights. It saves money, it saves energy, it's less work. Let's just keep places dark when people aren't there. And with that, I'd like to thank a whole bunch of people that have funded my research, and a huge thanks to the Xerces Society for being interested in light pollution and especially firefly conservation. And I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I found myself multiple times being like, oh, I didn't know that. And I appreciate just the honesty and kind of the public barrier for people to actually take action for this. I think sometimes we don't actually take a moment to think about that. And it's so important. Yeah, so some good questions coming in. If you guys have questions, please put it in the Q&A icon. So a few questions about yellow light specifically. People have heard that yellow light bulbs are better. Is that true?
Great question. Yes, thank you. So in general, and this is why, this image was made by people associated with IDA, and this booklet on the right here, they say warm color lights. So it's generally true that the warmer the light, the better. And so we tend to think of that as orange or yellow. But it's just sort of a weird thing about fireflies, which is that the yellow is the worst for fireflies. So for insects generally, I think, yes, it is better. But fireflies have this very unique thing that they do, which is they communicate using yellow light. So yellow light is probably not the best. And I think it's still the case that you could go even warmer. So red light is pretty firefly friendly. And so I sometimes, and we do suggest in the guidelines using red filters if that's something that's an option. So I have these slides here. So this is a dark sky friendly lighting installation that's amber. And the thing that's really tough about this is that oftentimes people will sort of, this color idea is it's very catchy. You think, well, yes, my orange light is insect friendly, and that means I can use as much as I want. which isn't really how it works. So there's this trade-off. The brighter a light is, the worse it is, regardless of color. That's just how vision works. And so we shouldn't sort of catch on to these colors and ignore everything else. I think it's the least important step is changing the color. The most important is making sure the lights aren't on when no one is around, using timers, and keeping it dim and shielded. And as a counterexample, so this is an image of a bat reserve in the Netherlands, where they've gone all out on the fully shielded, super dim red lights, which are not visible to bats. They wouldn't be very visible to fireflies. But even this is violating the #1 rule, which is that these lights are on and there's nobody out there on the sidewalk. We do not need lights on when there aren't people. And so getting caught up in color, I think it's sort of a distraction from the real and much simpler things that we can do.
So red light is best, or no light is best. Red light is okay, but the brighter, it doesn't matter what color it is. It's
Exactly.
still brighter the worse. Okay, that makes sense. It's much more complicated than you think.
Well, and that's why we tried to put it so in the guidelines, it's sort of in an ordered list. So you kind of start at the top and work your way down. So first it's like, does this light do anything at all? If not, maybe get rid of it. And otherwise, if you're not around, turn it off because nobody's using it. And then timers can help with this as well. And then these are like, the big ticket items. And then if you're really like getting into it, absolutely like use some red gel filters to make them dimmer. And do shielding. I think shielding is generally good, but like the big stuff is going to go most of the way.
Definitely. So you answered a couple of these in here. There's a few folks that are asking about solar lights on pathways and if that's damaging to insects. And a lot of it is sort of whether it's at a university, a college town, or a suburban homeowner that wants their outside lights as a crime deterrent. I guess you did talk about install motion activators, but do you have any other advice for those situations?
Yeah, I wish I had the IDA has some great slides on this. So I'll say, so garden lights, I think, again, so I mean, they're solar, so this is nice, right? They're not using any energy, and in that sense, they are very environmentally friendly. But if they're on in your backyard, they're near the ground, that's where all the insects are, right? This is sort of totally changing your yard habitat. And oftentimes you're not even really going to be appreciating these lights, right? I kind of like, I love string lights. I love a nicely lit garden as much as anybody. But I think if you can sort of plug them in or unplug them, or with the solar lights, have a switch that you could activate the switches so that you can enjoy them when you're there, but you don't need to have them when you're not there. And as far as safety goes, I would never argue that anybody needs to feel unsafe. And this is why I think motion detectors are the ultimate solution. So if you're there, absolutely, use as much light as you want. That being said, I mean, there's not great evidence that light actually does anything for crime. And in some cases, it can be really dangerous. So we talk about LED headlights, right? These are blinding, they prevent you from seeing. Really bright house lights will do the same thing. So it's actually, in terms of, burglars or, other ne'er-do-wells, like it's actually easier for them to hide in shadows in a really brightly lit area where there's this great contrast between the light and the dark. Whereas something that's more uniformly lit, you have much better visibility. And also though, a motion detector that triggers when an intruder comes is going to be the best of all.
Yeah, I never thought about the contrast with the greater shadows. That definitely makes sense. LED headlights, that's a big pet peeve of mine. I can't see at night already, so it's hard when you're driving around. We had a question about the dung beetle specifically, if they can see the Milky Way during the day, because Ray has seen them rolling dung during the day.
Yes, so actually, so the dung beetles, they kind of have this tiered system. They'll sort of use whatever is most visible in the habitat. So during the day, it's probably the sun. And it's just like any sort of thing that they can keep at a constant angle. And at night, if the moon is out, they'll use the moon. And if the moon's not out, they'll use the Milky Way. And if you can't see the Milky Way, they can still maybe sometimes use patterns of starlight a little bit. But if it gets really hazy, it's very difficult for them to orient. And you should also see this if it's super foggy or cloudy during the day. It'll probably be harder for the dung beetles to go straight. But they're actually, yeah, it's an extremely sophisticated system. And these researchers have discovered this by putting dung beetles in these, what is that called? The places you go where they project the stars onto the dome. I always forget the name of that thing.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm
that.
blanking out as well. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
All right.
I'm gonna see if a planetarium.
Thank you. Yes. So they can put dung beetles in planetariums and test all these different scenarios. And it's like, whoa, they're actually incredibly smart. And interestingly, like dung beetles are like in crisis as much as, I mean, they're one of the major groups that we point to are like, whoa, they're not doing well. And could this be a reason why? We don't know enough to say, but I do think it's interesting that they in particular are doing so poorly. I think a lot about when you hear about like certain groups doing really badly, I think about it in terms of light pollution. These are my own biases, but it does tend to be the case that insects in open areas where light could get in are more affected. So forest insects are doing better than ones in fields. Aquatic insects are doing worse than ones that live in soil and things like this. Once you start thinking about it, you can see how, wow, like maybe this is a big thing that's been really going unnoticed for a very long time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that line of thought, a few people are asking about what your involvement is in the International Dark Sky Association. And maybe you can shed light, I don't know if that's the right term to use here, I'm sorry. Just on like what conversations are being had kind of in the background with communities and at the city level and policymakers of what is happening to reduce light pollution.
Absolutely. So I guess I mean, I know some of the people. It's a very small organization, like in terms of the leadership, and it's just a bunch of people who are really big fans. And I'm a huge fan, so I'm a fan and member of the Massachusetts chapter. Just like I'm a fan of Xerces. It's kind of the same relationship. I just think they're great. And so they have this sort of chapter. So they have a couple things. One is their Dark Sky Park program, where certain places can be certified as dark sky friendly. And this has been really effective at preserving some of our most pristine night skies. And they also have a lot of chapters all around the world, but especially in the US, there's a lot of local chapters. And that's where most light pollution work is done, at the very small sort of town or city scale. So we have, so I mentioned Gail in Nantucket, absolute champion. She's gotten this lighting ordinance passed after many, many years of canvassing and working and talking with her legislators. And that is sort of, there's multiple examples of this. And so if you join a chapter, you'll hear about the projects that are happening. And if you are, involved in your town and know the people on the city council, you would be surprised how much you can do. There are some limitations. I know it's like, who makes the rules of what lights are out there? It's like kind of complicated, but you can do a lot locally. At the state level, there are not really all that many people talking about laws that limit light pollution as an ecological perspective. So all of our lighting legislation is based on energy efficiency, essentially. And so a lot of the restrictions are based on sort of how much energy or how much power you're allowed to direct towards lighting, which worked well until we got super energy efficient LEDs. And so now the lighting budget is just enormous, and there's nobody sort of putting an upper limit on how bright a place can be. There's lower limits, but no upper limits. The Massachusetts state legislature, there's been a bill for a really long time. It almost passed last year. I think it might pass this year, hopefully. So there's a little bit of movement, but it does seem to be the case that no state wants to be first. And so we're still you need that momentum at the local level to sort of scale up. And then the other thing I'll say about this, and so nationally, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. The climate bill mentions lighting but it's all energy efficiency. There's nothing about, limiting light pollution. But the other thing I'll say is that in many cases also, I don't think the streetlights are doing the most damage. This is what we think of, and we want to sort of point the finger. But actually I think it's windows. It's windows and homeowners and people making individual private decisions, which you can have, regulations that encourage people, but in many ways, just talking to your neighbor is probably the best thing that you can do. and getting people to use curtains. And I think if you live in a more rural place, it's all the more important to do this, because one window in Boston, not a big deal. One house light, in the middle of nowhere, Maine, is going to have a huge impact on all of the animals around. And so I think you can make a big difference.
Definitely. Thank you. We had a specific question about UV lights from Stacy, if they impact insects, and they're wondering because they would go scorpion hunting with UV lights in grad school to watch their behavior, and that's why they're asking. I just think it's a really interesting question.
And is it? Yeah, so scorpions fluoresce. Actually, a lot of insects also fluoresce, and I have a friend who uses a UV light to find caterpillars at night because they just sort of light up. So yes, a UV is the most attractive to insects by far. So way back at the beginning, I talked about how entomologists use lights to attract insects so that they can look at them. And they use UV-rich lights like this. They might be kind of white, but there's a big UV component because that is what the insects like. We don't really know why. Insects are good at seeing UV, so it would make sense that maybe they just see these lights really well. So yeah, I think in general, I would say, in terms of like lighting your house, maybe don't use UV. You can't even see it, so it's not doing you any good, and it's going to do a lot of damage to the insects. And some older lighting types, mercury vapor, huge UV component, maybe don't use those lights. Stick with LEDs. LEDs are very controlled in what wavelengths they put out, so they'll only put out things, wavelengths that you can see. That being said, I think a flashlight is the most environmentally friendly form of lighting on Earth, because when the person is there, the flashlight is on, and when the person is not there, the flashlight is gone. So I think using a UV flashlight to go scorpion hunting, that's super fun. You might get some moths flying at your light, tell them hello, send them on their way. Not a huge deal, just because, it has a purpose. Lighting with a purpose, sort of by definition, isn't light pollution.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have time. We've gone a little bit over, but I have two more questions I wanted to ask. I got an interesting question from Jeff. Is wondering if anyone's looked at really dark locations, such as northern Canada in the middle of nowhere. I wonder if that's where Jeff lives, maybe not, to see if insect populations have been declining. So it's hard because there's a lot of things that are impacting insects. So how do you balance that with all the other things, including like?
Yes. So I think these are the questions that keep me up at night, Jeff. So how can you tell if light pollution is doing it, or if the city associated with light pollution is doing it, or the house or the road? And you need controlled studies. And there was one in the UK where they tried to, it's just really hard to control though. So you can sort of put light pollution in categories. And if you compare a light rural place to a dark rural place, then maybe you're sort of comparing the same thing, but there's a lot of caveats. And I think also it's extra confusing because we usually count the insects with lights. And so a light might catch more insects in a dark spot just because it's more visible and this and that. But I don't know of any like truly controlled sort of study looking at this on a broad scale, but talk to me again in 4 years, and I think I could have a better answer for you.
Thank you. And I did want folks to know this will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel by the end of the week, so you can share it. Some folks were wondering about that. And then the last question I wanted to end on was from Erin. It's a really good one. Just talking about how we reach the public. And I know that you've talked about a couple of things, but if you have any other advice for people here, talking to your neighbors, making sure that you don't have light pollution coming from your house. What else can folks do, maybe that live in apartment complexes or in a condo?
Yeah, there's a really good article about this. I think it was in the Washington Post like last week. It was called like "The Light Police Came to My House and I'm Glad They Did," and it's about this guy that put up a bunch of house lights, and then IDA representatives came and were like, I think it was an IDA, it was like a dark sky area, so there were certain rules, but they came and one of the things that they did is they were like, you have a great night sky here, like, and if you feel ownership over that, I think that's very empowering. Like, oh, this spot is really nice, don't you want it to continue to be nice? Wouldn't that be good? And here's some things that you can do. So I think the things that, get people kind of riled up are, I'm the homeowner, I can do what I want, which is like true of pesticide use as well. So this is like a common problem. And for that, I think we got to motivate people like, yes, but like, don't you want, all of these amazing, like, don't you want native plants in your gardens and all of these beautiful bumblebees and butterflies, and fireflies is a great one. Like, don't you want fireflies in your backyard? They could be yours if you just light a little more responsibly. So sort of like opening the conversation that way, I think can be helpful. Some people are just really like, don't want to change. And I think, we got to make peace with that, and also try to at least get them to limit the light to their particular area and not let it spill out into the rest of the space. And the other thing I'll say is the safety issue is like a non-starter. Like don't even go there. If somebody feels unsafe, like you're not going to get anywhere being like, but it's actually not a big deal, so you shouldn't. I think, we want to respect the way people feel, and you can encourage people and, give them some facts about visibility at night, and also that, your night vision's pretty good and you actually probably could see a lot if it were darker. But I think just that being said, I tend to not even go there and just say, okay, well, if you're not there, the lights don't have to be on, motion activator. That's all. If you're there, absolutely use all you want, I guess, but let's just try to get the low-hanging fruit first.